The world of 8th scale racing is dominated by two different methods of propulsion in the modern world. Those two methods being nitromethane fuel and brushless electric motors and LiPo batteries. Even though I haven't had too much experience with nitro as a whole, I have had a lot of contact with it over the time I've done 8th scale, and after running both e-buggy and nitro buggy for a little bit, I think I have a good idea what makes each car tick. If you've seen my other two videos in this sort of format, you probably already know the idea of what I'm going to do, but if you don't, let me explain. I'll be going over the history of each class, where they came from, their pros, cons, and how they compare to the other class. Even though this video will be mostly going over 8th scale buggy and truggy, I will be mentioning other classes of different scales like gas trucks and 10th scale. Before you begin, however, I'd like to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more. Also, if you'd like to enter into a little raffle going on right now for this pink rose short course body, feel free to donate $5 to this email address right here, roachrc1@gmail.com. Every $5 is a chance to win. With that out of the way, let's get started. Nitro buggies as we know them today can be traced back a long time, almost back to the start of radio control as we know it. I went over this in more detail prior in a few of my history videos, specifically my history of Kyosho video, but to give you the bluff notes, it goes something like this. In the early days of radio control, late 60s, early 70s, more and more people were getting to this world of model RC. Not necessarily cars, but planes. These plane models at the time didn't use electric motors, as motor technology simply wasn't good enough to run a plane at any fun speed. The solution? Build a tiny engine, and that's exactly what a few companies did. Eventually, for the same reason RC model plane used actual nitromethane fuel engines, model and more importantly radio control racing vehicles like the RC1 and RC100 pan cars from Associated began using them as well. Eventually, these engines made their way into many different types of RC platforms, for like the aforementioned pan cars, touring cars, monster trucks, and of course, buggies, with cars like the Kyosho Vanning and Land Jump being the precursor to the modern day 8th scale nitro buggies we know today. Now, this was a very oversimplified summary, so if you'd like to know more, I linked off a few different articles and forum pages that go more into depth about the origin of nitro engines as a whole. So why exactly would you go for these loud brat machines? Well, for a lot of people, including me to an extent, the challenge of tuning an engine right and constantly working and tinkering with your RC car is part of the fun. Also, even though people who only run electric classes wouldn't always admit it, nitro is where all of the attention usually is in terms of spectators and awards. As racers usually say, nitro is the glory, but e-buggy pays the bills. So if you want to get all the attention and bragging rights, you're going to want to go with nitro buggy. Another advantage that nitro has over electric is runtime. Even though LiPo battery technology has come a long way since its inception, and batteries can last a little while, for both technical limitation reasons and safety reasons, mains for electric cars rarely pass the 10-minute mark. Nitro mains, on the other hand, can last well into an hour depending on how far they want to take it. This is because unlike an electric mains and very much like other motorsports, there are pit stops where cars are refueled, allowing for racers to go on for much longer. And because you're getting a lot more track time, you're also getting better a bit quicker than if you were to only run an electric class. So there are many benefits to running nitro over electric classes. Now for some downers. First off, notice how I only really talked about 8th scale in the previous section. Well, there's a very good reason for this. Quite simply, there isn't really a large following for 10th scale nitro in the 10th scale off-road world, with the exception of Gas Truck from Ignite RC in some pockets around the country. So once again, if you're only running 10th scale, especially indoors, the choice is already made for you. Secondly, there's the cost of nitro, and I don't just mean fuel. All the things needed to keep a nitro engine running good, from air filters, specialty tools, replacement parts on wear parts like clutches and various other things, can add up over time. Not only that, but there's also a heavy time commitment when it comes to running a nitro engine as well. It's not uncommon for a lot of people to do complete teardowns of their engines to ensure they're running properly. This of course takes a decent amount of time the first time around if you don't know what you're doing, and if you get it wrong, well, at best you can just repair it, but at worst you're going to have to buy a new engine that can cost the same as a little kit. Add on top of that all the things needed to keep a buggy running, from tires to rebuilding shocks and diffs and bodies, and you have a recipe for a very expensive race program. The last main issue that Nitro faces these days would have to be the rules and regulations surrounding Nitro fuel as a whole. A good example would be the whole Bones fuel situation regarding having to store nitromethane fuel in metal containers in California. Then there is the situation of having to have a license to both sell and run nitro content fuels or high nitro content fuels in places like the EU and the United Kingdom. Not only that, but for those of us who live in highly populated areas or in places where the Homeowners Association rules with an iron fist, running a nitro car to simply break it in can be at best finable and at worst straight up illegal. Even with all that being put against RC nitro buggies, people still race them with frequency for the simple reason of the fact that Nitro RC is an experience that can't really be beat. The sound of a nitro engine running at 20k RPM, the smell of race fuel, the feel of tuning an engine, and all the drawing points that e-buggies, by extension e-truggies, can't really bring to the table. There are things though that e-buggies can do that nitro buggies can't. So let's shift gears and talk about e-buggies and e-truggies. E-buggies, and by extension truggies as we know them today, are a relatively recent phenomenon. The reason for this goes back to the fact that for a long time, if you wanted to run a larger than 10 scale RC car, you wanted to run nitro, as brushed electric motors and NID batteries or even nickel metal cadmium packs simply didn't have the punch to be able to move a larger than 10 scale car with any speed that would be considered fun. As a result, the standard for your larger than 10 scale and even some 10 scale cars like buggies, trucks, and monster trucks were all run by nitro engines, as they tended to have more torque and higher top ends than their electric counterparts. This all changed when two things came together to change the world of RC forever, those being brushless motor systems and lithium polymer or LiPo batteries. First, we have the benefit of LiPo batteries compared to the previously widely used nickel metal hydride batteries. Because they can hold a longer charge, their voltage stays relatively the same throughout discharge, and considering how much lighter they are than NIM batteries, it wasn't surprising that they started to catch on in the early to late 2000s. However, this wasn't the only piece of the puzzle. The other part that was evolving around about the same time as LiPo batteries began to take off was brushless motors. Now, I'm sure you'd love for me to explain exactly how a brushless system works compared to a brushed motor, but to save time and my own sanity, I'm simply going to say this. Brushless systems have a lot more torque and require a lot less maintenance than brush motors do, and as a result, it wasn't long before everyone, including racers, were using brushless motors and LiPo batteries in mostly 10 scale stuff. However, once people began to realize just how powerful brushless systems could be with the proper amount of LiPo cells, and when these systems being put in monster trucks here and there, racers also began putting these systems in their 8 scale buggies and trucks using homemade conversion kits. Eventually, this practice became so widespread that a few RC companies would begin to create their own conversion kits for various platforms. Take for example, Techno. Later on, companies would start to develop their own big boy e-buggy and e-truggy kits to capitalize on the growth of e-buggy and e-truggy class as a whole. And here we are today. So, what are some of the benefits to running electric over nitro? Well, first off, this is a big one, is that electric is far more convenient to run than nitro in almost every way. You don't need a pit guy to pit for you during races, there's nothing you need to tune in order to get your engine, or in this case motor, to run correctly, and you don't really need to go through a break-in period before you can run your RC car. The second big benefit compared to nitro is cost. This point is arguable, depending on how much you spend on average in terms of initial costs and engines and servos and such. However, I'm willing to say that on the average cost of a motor and ESC combo is usually cheaper than the average engine and pipe combo. Of course, we'll get into the true cost of electric in a bit, but overall, cost of electric in the long term is generally less than nitro. Another benefit that electric have over nitro is the fact that convenience both literally and legally. literally in the fact that you don't have to take time to warm up your engine with a hairdryer or engine warmer before starting your car. It's quite simply plug and play, so if you want to just go out and run your car on the track, there's very little prep that has to go into it. On the legal side, there are some places in different countries or even states that don't allow you to run a fuel-powered RC car anywhere or anytime you want. Then there's the question of buying fuel in the first place. Depending on where you live, you're going to have to settle for a certain level of nitro content in your fuel. If you live in the US, you can use up to 30%. In Europe, it's a lot less than this, unfortunately, unless you have a license to both sell and run high nitro content fuel. Hell, I know of a few different tracks in the US that don't allow nitro cars for the sake of being able to have a track in a highly populated area, like a park. So, you can run electric cars in more places, they're simpler, less expensive, and don't require as much maintenance. Now for some downers. Like I said before, I'll be completely honest. E-buggy and by extension e-truggy are not the competitor classes for 8-scale RC for one main reason. They aren't a spectacle. I'm going to go over full-size racing for a sec. Part of the reason why people love racing isn't just the technical side of things. They go for the whole experience. The sounds of engines roaring, the smell of ethanol in the air, the vibration in the ground as the cars go past. People go to places to see that. Electric cars simply don't have the same presence that internal combustion engine cars do, and this extends to RC. This is why crowds gather around during nitro mains for both nitro buggy and truggy. It's simply more entertaining to watch. Both are fun to partake in, but nitro is more fun to watch. Secondly, there's the problem of upfront cost. Even though the cost of electric RC 8-scale buggies and truggies are usually cheaper than their nitro counterparts, in the long term, it doesn't really feel like it when presented with the cost up front if you're starting from nothing. You're going to need the car and all the electronics, including a battery, which on its own can be above $100. Then you have the question of the charger, which can also be a bit of a tough pill to swallow. So even though electric RCs tend to be cheaper than nitro-powered ones, they aren't by any stretch of the imagination cheap. The last downside that I want to go over in terms of electric versus nitro is the amount of track time you actually get, especially if you're not consistently in the A main. Like I mentioned before, nitro mains can go on for a very long time. This is because of the fact that you can drive and fuel up over and over again for the course of a race. Electric cars can't really do that unless you can change out batteries really quickly, and even then, for safety reasons, electric cars are only pushed so hard for so long. After about a 10-minute run, you're almost going to want to have to let your electronics cool down before you can ideally run them again. As a result, you get less track time, and less track time means less practice. If you want to get better quickly, running only electric may not be the best option for you. So, we've gone over the benefits and downsides to each form of buggy and truggy, and we've gone over a bit of the general history for each as well. For my own opinion, under most circumstances I'd be running both e-buggy and nitro buggy of the same brand. However, I am not under normal circumstances at this moment, and I simply don't have the time or money to be able to run a nitro buggy. The cost of maintenance and time is simply too much. E-buggy makes a lot more sense for someone who either doesn't have the time, money, or desire to get really stuck into a full-blown racing machine like a nitro buggy. If you do want to get stuck into a really rewarding, if time-consuming hobby, and you have a lot of disposable income, nitro buggy is probably more for you. I will say though that if you're on the fence about whether or not you want to grab a nitro buggy, see if you can borrow the controller to one and drive it for a little bit before making a decision as to whether or not you think the occasional headache will be worth it. In the end though, I don't think you can go wrong with either choice. Both are fun in their own way, and both aren't going anywhere anytime soon. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Also, just as a reminder, I'll be raffling this short course body off, so if you'd like to enter to win this rose-petaled body, feel free to donate to this PayPal address right here. If you're just listening to this video, the email is roachrc1@gmail.com. Every $5 is one entry to win. Also, if you'd like to support me another way, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon, where I post updates and teasers to my next videos. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Joe Jenkins, Rob Bedingfield, Cade Merks, Ian Petrie, Keith McDonald, Spiru Harvey, Logan Jutkins, Salvador Rivera, and especially Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.